Hello and welcome back to AP World History and Modern. Today we are on our second day of Unit 9.4, Economics in the Global Age, and we're looking for continuities and changes in the global economy from 1900 to present, and really just kind of case study this whole encouragement of free market policies with a specific focus on China, on China in the years following Mao Zedong. So we're largely concentrating here. I have a couple other slides at the end, which kind of skim through, just kind of, to let you know what these trade organizations are or what countries make them up. All right, but largely we're just going to do a little kind of focusing on this. All right, so and of course, multinational corporations are kind of a major part of these free market policies, and they are they have a lot to do with the encouragement of free market policies by the Chinese government. It was an interesting relationship that rose in the 1980s between the Chinese government and Western multinational corporations. So, generally, if we're going to talk about this, we need to start talking about Deng Xiaoping, right? So, Deng, he's the leader to emerge in China following the death in 1976 of Mao Zedong. And when Mao dies, right, we see a continuing of relationship building between the United States and China that had been started under Nixon. Kissinger had developed that relationship, and then Nixon will meet with Mao. Right, so we see a continuity of that relationship under the Carter administration in the United States and with Deng Xiaoping. So, and generally we talk about this, the tactics used by Deng, to modernize the country after the kind of devastating experience of the Cultural Revolution. So the four modernizations are typically what you explore. And I will say you spend literally weeks on Deng Xiaoping if you're taking AP comparative government, where you will dig really deep into these topics. This is not that class, so we're simply just identifying that four modernizations are part of that platform. And of course, the major component here is this whole notion of socialism with Chinese characteristics, which means reforms and opening up China to the rest of the world. And we already read about this in a previous homework. We read about the SEZs, those special economic zones that popped up during the Deng era. We also see a new constitution under Deng Xiaoping that will be revised under Xi Jinping. The term limits, which I'll reference in a bit, will be updated. There's also a lot of social things going on in China at this time, political things going on at this time. But we're not going to kind of dig into this once again. AP comparative government, you'll learn all about one child, but we're going to stay kind of focused on economic with a little bit of political, right? So just kind of be aware there are a bunch of other social implications going on. All right, so if you look at why China made that transition to, from its centrally planned command policies under Mao to this new encouragement of free market policies starting with Deng Xiaoping, you can compare how China was doing with the rest of the world economically. Just kind of looking at GDP growth from the end of World War II. Up until the death of Mao. And you can see the kind of general stagnation that takes place. I've read that it's it was between like 2 to 3% GDP growth during the Mao years, and and the population doubles during those years. So 2% in and of itself for GDP growth doesn't sound that terrible. Just when you do compare it to other parts of the world, you can see the lag here, especially when you compare it to its neighbors. The whole Japanese economic miracle that is taking place. Right. So what we see happening, after this period of kind of relative economic stagnation, during the Mao years, is we see things turn around. right? And we see growth begin to take place under Deng Xiaoping. And then, of course, we see kind of a catalyst event here in '89, which really opens the floodgates, right? So we'll kind of talk about what happens in 1989, right? Which kind of turns things around. And then, of course, China's entrance in the WTO, into the World Trade Organization, will also result in exponential growth of their economy. All right, so just feel free to read through this. Okay, all right, moving on. All right, and so we see the multinational corporations coming in, and if you're talking about like why this growth is happening, a lot of this has to do with, the rise of manufacturing in China. But you do also see multinational companies coming in, and you do see kind of a cultural, sharing going on as well. So we see this in 1987. So this is the Tiananmen Square Kentucky Fried Chicken. All right, and KFCs are prevalent throughout China to this day. All right, this is today, or a few years ago at least, at the Beijing airport, right? So you land in the international terminal at Beijing, and there's a McDonald's right there for you. I picked this up at just what we would call a convenience store. So Frito-Lay's, right? This is at one of many, right, kind of touristy areas before you go to the Great Wall. See the Great Wall up on the spine or on the ridge of that mountain. All right, so you will recognize a lot of kind of multinational corporate presence, right, from the United States. When you go to China, right? So, but that's when you talk about this kind of massive economic GDP turnaround. This is not really what we're talking about. This kind of growth is manufacturing, right? But there is also some kind of cultural components as well, right? Which we'll come back and talk about in a minute. All right, and of course, you can't, it's like there are some things you have to talk about if you're talking about the Deng Xiaoping years. So we are ignoring the one-child issues and consequences, although I think I did talk about that on a previous video. But if you're going to talk about kind of Deng Xiaoping, you need to kind of talk about this issue that happens in '89, right? So if you're talking about economic reform and economic liberalization that we see taking place under Deng Xiaoping, you also have a growing kind of political reform movement in the 1970s and 80s as well. This movement existed before, this movement is present in China in the early 1970s, before the death of Mao. But as the economic reforms were made, you're going to see pressure for political reform as well. So there is that kind of burgeoning pro-democracy, pro-civil liberties movement rising in China during this time, and right, and the events of 1989 are really sparked by the death of a pro-democracy leader, and that's going to result in April, right? In April of 1989, you're going to see people mourning his death, right? People mourning his death come out and begin to set up camp in Tiananmen Square, building little statues, pro-democracy, pro-liberty statues. And this will run up until June 3rd, right? June 3rd of 1989, and then the Chinese government will then clear out Tiananmen Square. So that'll be on June 3rd, and then the night of June 3rd, once the students were cleared out of the square, they refused to go home, right? So they were just simply in the streets of Beijing at that point. And that is when the violence begins. So the military successfully cleared them out of the square, but didn't successfully force them to go home. So because they refuse to go home, then you hear about what eventually becomes known as the massacre. The massacre itself, official Chinese numbers are in the low hundreds. It's like 300 or something, somewhere in that neighborhood is like the official numbers from Beijing. According to the Red Cross, it's over 2,000 people were killed. Saw the BBC a couple of years ago came out with a revised number based on looking at all the evidence, and the BBC put the number around 10,000 killed that night. Right, and of course, one of the most enduring images from the Tiananmen Square, the whole Tiananmen Square massacre is this kind of very famous video that was broadcast live across the world. And one thing to kind of keep in mind with this is that this is the morning after. So this is on June 4th. This is the morning after the Tiananmen Square massacre takes place. So you got to kind of wrap your mind around the fact that this guy isn't just standing in front of the tanks as they're coming into clear Tiananmen Square. This is the next day after this exact same military had just killed thousands of people in China. He then stands down the tanks and prevents them from proceeding. So we watch this in class, and for the most part, I mean, we're a long ways from these events now. We're 30 plus years away from this now. So students have generally seen this image, but they don't know what happens. So it's kind of interesting to just ask the students what happens next. And we watch through this. It's pretty good. It's only 2 minutes, so and readily available online. I also kind of like to show this video, and this is just looking at the 20th anniversary of what happened at Tiananmen Square, and so this is off from CNN's website. And I always kind of like to show this. Pro-democracy demonstrated. The rallies began in April 1989 after the death of China's reformist leader. The massive protests went on for weeks, with students erecting their own version of the Statue of Liberty. Finally, martial law was declared and troops moved into Tiananmen Square. On the night of June 3rd, they cleared the square and opened fire, killing hundreds. The lasting image. One young man standing in front of a row of tanks occupying the square. He became a symbol of the struggle for freedom. To this day, his fate is unknown. In Beijing, John Boss and Emily Chang report on the extraordinary steps China is taking to block commemorations of the 1989 events. So kind of show that just as just kind of show this, and you can see they're trying to film on the 20th anniversary of the the Tiananmen Square massacre, and you've got obviously people there from the Chinese government blocking and preventing any live filming from going on. But I also like to show this because if I just kind of skip ahead a little bit, it also shows the other thing that happens during this time.
Information controls are also being stepped up. I'm Emily Chang.
And this is part of a few days from now, we'll be looking at technology and that kind of stuff. So we'll actually talk about, the internet censorship. And we often, kind of think about China is censored, and, everyone knows about the kind of the internet Great Wall that exists. But they're going to show you here that, Twitter used to be available in China. Google used to be available in China. A lot of the social media platforms that we have in the United States used to be available in China until just about a decade ago. And you see a real change happen in China about a decade ago. So, it wasn't just 1989. When we see major changes happen in regards to civil liberties and freedom of speech and the such, about 12 years ago, about 2009. A major shift happened, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well.
Internet cafe in Beijing where people are suddenly having trouble logging on to different websites. Twitter, the popular microblogging website, has apparently been blocked. As you try to pull it up, you get this error message saying the page cannot be reached. Hotmail and Flickr, a photo sharing website, are also not working, and YouTube has been blocked since March. The Chinese government doesn't comment on specific internet issues, but has said it manages the internet according to law. Now, international TV channels are also...
So Twitter, Flickr, YouTube, all used to be, until 12 years ago, available or a decade ago.
Being censored. CNN reports on the Tiananmen crackdown have been repeatedly blacked out.
The Thursday marks the 20th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square.
Chinese officials have declined to comment on these latest service interruptions. Last year, CNN coverage of protests in Tibet.
So those blackouts like that, you'll often hear of autocratic states, doing stuff like that. Last week, there was kind of a famous case in the news. There was a Premiership League soccer game out of England that had a female referee, line judge, and when they broadcast the game in Iran, I heard they blanked out the coverage of that soccer game 200 times. Every time that female line judge was on television, they had to black it out like that. Because on Iranian state television, you're not allowed to show women's legs, and you could see from the top of her socks to the bottom of her shorts, this much leg, was present. So you hear about these blackouts, every once in a while. I guess in China, most recently, you heard about it during the last presidential debate, when President Trump was talking about the Uyghurs, and about Chinese policy. They blacked it out. All right, so this is kind of television censorship that you often hear of.
Was also blacked out, but it hasn't happened again until now, as China reaches this sensitive anniversary.
All right, so when I was in China, I did Google. When you are on your phone, when you're on an international data plan, you are allowed to access some things, like Google, or at least you could have back in 2018. So when I Googled Tiananmen Square, this is what I came up with. So Chinese Bing did allow the search, but this is what I got. So China expressed strong disapproval and opposition towards the United States' recent accusation about China human rights record in regards to Tiananmen Square incident in 1989. And so there's a story about that. And then they're redirecting you to Mao Zedong declaring the PRC in Tiananmen Square. Right. So that's how it comes up on the internet, right? When you are in China. All right. So we talked about this before, when we talked about the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the question, of course, is why, so we'll talk about it again, though. When you talk about why the Soviet Union collapses and, the Cold War comes to an end in 91, amid the pressure of civil liberties and democracy, why is China able to survive? Like, why is Deng Xiaoping able to navigate China through these kind of very tumultuous waters when the Soviet Union, a much larger economy, was unable, right, to navigate this, and you will hear arguments made that because Mao had done so much damage to its own economy, that the results of that is, that China was sufficiently decentralized by the time you get to 1976, and ready to adopt these kinds of, this kind of independent, right, local planning that'd be necessary for free market reforms, right? So, this is kind of an interesting way of looking at why China was able to navigate this shift, right, to what it is today, right? So where free market policies are largely, we see a corporatist economy today, all right? So a corporatist economy in China with an autocratic, right, autocratic government, and when you look at this, right, 1989, this is sometimes referred to as like the unofficial deal that gets made, or the unofficial contract between the Chinese government and its people. And that unofficial contract is you're generally referred to as, if you want free market policies, right, to be instituted, if you want the government to encourage free market economics, right, you want private property, you want to be able to start your own business, you want to be able to run with a free market economy, that's fine, but do not ask for political freedom. Do not ask for democracy, right? So, autocracy is the accepted form of government here. And we see that kind of major transition happen, and we can see it taken off after '89. Just by looking at the U.S. trade balance with China. We see that '89 to 2001 run as a pretty dramatic increase. And then we see China's entrance into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And that's when you see the kind of exponential growth of the Chinese economy. And just as a kind of reminder on this, right, we're talking about balance of trade here, and I always kind of like to make sure you understand what we're talking about. This is not trade deficit, right? This is balance, right? Balance of trade, right? So we're talking about China, right? We're talking about, in this case here, right? We're talking about the USA, and right, we know that both sides, right? Both sides ship manufactured, right? Manufactured goods. Call that MG, right? We know that both sides are shipping manufactured goods to each other, right? And of course, when we receive manufactured goods, you also have money, right, being sent. Right, being sent. All right. There we go. All right. So we have currency being sent back and forth here as a result of that. So when we're talking about around the 1980s, it was pretty even, right? There was a trade balance of trade, or a trade balance that was that existed. But after 1989, you increasingly see, right? We increasingly see the amount of manufactured goods growing, right? Manufactured goods is growing, right? Becoming much more prominent, right? Or kind of largely outnumbering. And what that means is, the amount of American dollars going overseas is also increasing, right? So that's what we're talking. We're not talking about, this is not the budget deficit or the national debt or anything like that. This is purely referring to how much manufactured goods, or just how many goods at all, are being sold from one country to another, right? So we live in a place where we actually manufacture goods in our county that get sold in China, so we know that we send stuff to China. It's just more goods are coming into our country than coming out of our country, right? So as those boats come into our port, they're sitting deeper in the water than when they leave, right? Right. So that's all that's referring to here, right? And you can see kind of the two moments of growth, the two kind of major turning point moments. '89, right, with that unofficial deal is struck, and then 2001 with the WTO. All right. So right, this is something that we kind of just spend a moment on the class to kind of check for understanding. All right, so let's talk just for a moment about Xi Jinping, because as we mentioned before in that CNN video, things are changing pretty dramatically, and is Xi Jinping different than his predecessors, and the answer is quite obviously yes, he is very different, and people make an argument for cult of personality, just because there's you have a leader's face on a plate or something. Is that an example of cult of personality? Yeah, that's kind of a stretch, But people do make an argument that Xi Jinping has positioned himself in the state media in a way that we do not see his predecessors do, or we haven't seen this kind of stuff since Mao. Where the other members of the Central Committee are relatively prominently right, displayed here. You can see how they're being displayed, during the Xi years. And we also know that Xi changes the constitution and gets rid of the term limits, right? So he can now, right, be, in effect, right, be president for life. He has also rooted out corruption in China, and by corruption, right, that you could also say that he has rooted out his political dissidents or his political enemies. So this is it's an interesting time, right, where we're seeing some pretty fast and major transitions happening in China. This is a French news channel take on this. So let's just kind of watch this for a second, because I think this is kind of a really kind of good little portrayal of this.
It's an exchange between fellow presidents and friends from all.
Right, so it's a few minutes. So
it takes a closer look at President Xi Jinping in China. 6 years after taking over the world's most populous country, he's now changed the rules so that he can serve indefinitely as president. Despite never giving interviews, the Chinese press runs regular front-page stories on him. In fact, as our reporter shows, he is omnipresent and at home overall ultra-popular, seen as the man to combat corruption. But he's also one of the most authoritarian leaders in power today. Sarah Umara and Antoine Vidaye send us this report.
A friendly-looking man, with the assurance of someone who knows he is untouchable, Xi Jinping walks towards unlimited and unrestricted power. The 3,000 Chinese deputies have removed the limit of 2 presidential terms, which is the coronation of China's strongest man, thanks to a cult of personality. In this antiques market in Beijing, the cult of personality around Mao Zedong remains intact, 40 years after the death of the great helmsman. But now on the stalls, we also find busts of the effigy of Xi Jinping.
I think there are a lot of people interested. We do that because we respect him. He's a great man of our time. He won the hearts of the people.
Today, President Xi Jinping is also present on posters, cups, and plates.
We put him in our houses to protect our home and bring good fortune.
Xi Jinping, a lucky charm president, the most popular since Mao. The Chinese even call him Xi Baba, Uncle Xi.
I think this nickname is a sign of respect. He governs well.
I love him. I think that his policy for the country is very good and good for the people.
The Chinese president has forged his leadership in China by strengthening his position with the press.
That's selling well. I already sold everything, and this copy is the last one.
Beijing's leader regularly appears on the front page of every newspaper and in every news item. The writer Wu Rong Chun, whose books are banned by mainland China, notes this overwhelming presence.
Here on the front page, the big title is Xi Jinping, blah, blah, blah. I do not even want to read anymore. And he's also there just below. In recent years, hardly a day goes by without Xi's photo in official newspapers.
All media outlets are under orders. In 2016, he visited the editorial offices of the Chinese media. He received a triumphant welcome. He even sat down in an editor's seat.
Thanks to this propaganda machine, he is not only the political leader of the country, but also the mayor of thought and the idol of the people. He's a model of morality. In fact, it's like he's a god. I see. So?
The press often echoes the president's ultra-nationalist program. This is Xi Jinping's Chinese dream. Under his presidency, patriotism has been exacerbated. Military power reaffirmed. Xi Jinping does not hesitate to stage himself as chief of the armies launched to conquer the world. His goal, to restore the image of China. theory of the Chinese dream was first written about by a former colonel of the Red Army. He is betting on the decline of the United States to make Xi Jinping and China the masters of the world.
What is the Chinese dream? To sum it up, it's the rebirth of the Chinese nation. First, China has to go beyond the United States economically, and that will be done very quickly. Then at the level of values, China will pass before the United States, and it will be the Chinese values that will dominate the world.
All right, so there was a lot right there, right? So, and just kind of point this out real quick. One is he's talking about this economic domination, right, of China, right? So, and then the other thing he's talking about is these values, right? So, kind of economic, and the topic of values. So when it comes to the kind of the economic domination, right, of the world, Belt and Road, right, is specifically what is being referenced here. So this was announced to the world in 2003, and in class, when we went over this, I show the students a couple of things, and let me see if I can just find this really quick for you. Here it is. All right, so if you're not familiar with Belt and Road, right, one would assume you are familiar with Belt and Road. But if you're not familiar with Belt and Road, what we do is we watch in class this What is the Belt and Road Initiative. So if you kind of scroll down from where you're watching this right now, this is a video from China Daily, right? So funded in whole or part by the Chinese government. Right, so we watch this in class. So I would encourage you to kind of watch this as well. And this is actually one of a multi-part, coverage of what Belt and Road is. But it gives you a nice little quick overview of what Belt and Road is, and and it sounds pretty innocuous, all in all. And then in class, we usually watch this take on Belt and Road as well. So this is from WION, and this is a private news company out of India, and they do a lot of coverage of a whole range of topics. And I also kind of put a little POV limitations note here as well. Is that a lot of this coverage here is about China and Pakistan, and you may have some limitations with the source as well. All right, so anyway, what I just want to kind of show you here is just a little clip from this, and just kind of one of these things to be aware of. All right, so here we go. Let's just look at this excerpt.
5.3% of Pakistan's total foreign debt had an interest rate of 2% and a repayment period of 20 to 25 years. What happens if Pakistan fails to pay these loans on time? It will have to lease out the projects or ports to China, meaning China will control the projects. And this is where things get murky. You see, the BRI is not a gift. It is a debt trap, a means to lure developing nations into borrowing more than they can afford. Once they are buried under this debt, you enslave them by seizing strategic assets as collateral. It's already happening around the world. The Gwadar port in Pakistan has been leased to China for 40 years. The Omok military base in Djibouti has been leased for 10 years. Tajikistan had to cede more than 1,000 square kilometers of land for a petty loan. Laos had to let go of its entire national electric grid to a Chinese company. The Hambantota port in Sri Lanka has been leased to China for a period of 99 years. Same with the Malacca Gateway in Malaysia, in Chinese control for 99 years. That's the same amount of time, by the way, that the British leased Hong Kong for in 1898.
All right, so why does this matter? Right? Why does this matter? If you kind of grasp what she just said, this is economic imperialism, right? And part of our standards right now is the IMF, right? The International Monetary Fund, and the IMF and Bretton Woods arranged agreements, and what happens after World War II is that Western countries come together and provide an international framework to help developing countries fund projects. China, since 2013, has put themselves into a, similar role as the kind of global investor. However, it's functioning very differently than the IMF does, right? So, what we're seeing happening here is, a comparison was just made to the British Empire, because the British Empire used, right? How did they create the British Empire? They used, debt traps is one of the ways in which they built their empire. This, of course, very famously is the Egypt story, right, with the Suez Canal. So this is you get a couple things going on here, regarding Xi Jinping. So this is not something we have seen with China, really ever. Maybe you can make an argument that, maybe the Qing dynasty in building their land empire, right, kind of grew. And we are seeing that kind of economic imperialism in Central Asia, like what we saw during the Qing era. But this, Indian Ocean imperialism that we're starting to see, and now Africa, right, African imperialism by the Chinese, this is new in world history. Kind of seeing China, with this kind of expansion. And then the kind of second thing he talked about was values, and this is also something that we're seeing. Right now a lot. China is positioning itself as as an ideological alternative to the United States, right? And so we're obviously seeing the economic moves here, and in the creation of this bipolar world. So Belt and Road, the Belt and Road Initiative is an alternative to the IMF, right, in Western countries. And, when it comes to values, China has also situated itself. So what values are we talking about? The values of democracy, the values of free speech, the values of civil liberties. In China, China will say, do you want, when it's looking to make alliances, do you want your country to go the path of the West, of Western society? Look at the United States, look at Europe, right? Look at the democracies around the world. Is that the model you want to emulate today? And they will case study out the social issues that these countries have, right? The social issues, being, topics such as, but not limited to, issues with campaigns and democracies, homosexuality and transgenderism, issues like ethnicity and race. And China will kind of make arguments that they are a very ethnically diverse place, but they do not have the issues taking place in the streets, like what we see happening in places like the United States. So they are setting themselves up as an alternative, right? So we are increasingly seeing kind of a bipolar world, where the United States and the West and the IMF economically are on one side, and China, Belt and Road, are on the other. So let's kind of finish this little segment.
Becoming perhaps the master of the world, Xi Jinping has emerged as the undisputed leader of China by eliminating its opponents and by deciding the role of civil society. Since taking office, Xi Jinping has been campaigning for anti-corruption. This has made him popular and has also allowed him to eliminate his political opponents. No more competition within the party, and no more space for dissident voices inside the civil society.
All right, and I think that's probably good enough for that, right? So you're welcome to kind of Google that and watch it further if you would like. Okay, all right. So where's China today? So this is a photograph I took kind of moving towards the airport, and I guess we'll talk about this image more in a later. In a later video. Okay. I also going to have a couple photographs of our Strayer textbook that you see in China. So how how are these issues viewed in China? You know, I mean, how do people in China view even Mao, right? Kind of what Mao had done. There's not a lot of, so this is our textbook. This is a photograph of an English language school, from an English language school in China, that has made these available to me. Okay, and we see how Chinese history in China is taught to Chinese students at an English language only school. All right, so kind of interesting, always to see exactly what this is, and you can kind of do a little comparison with your own Strayer textbook to see what was taken out, right? What was eliminated from this. All right. Do you know what's blacked out here? All right. All right, so that's about it. We'll talk about this more when we get into kind of the internet aspects of this in a few days. Right, but one of the kind of one that you want to make sure you know the countries that are involved in things like the EU. So I just want to show you this ASEAN, what countries the ASEAN countries are. More closer, what countries those are. All right, of course, NAFTA, make sure you know what those countries those are. And we've already kind of watched this. All right, so that's about it for today. All right, so we can talk a little bit about the World Bank today and the IMF. Imposed free market pro-business conditions for many poor countries, favored a reduction in tariffs, free global movement of capital, more temporary workforce, privatization of many state-run enterprises, curtailing government efforts to regulate the economy. Right, taxing and spending cuts are being supported by them, and you're seeing, the whole Chinese economic imperialism under Xi Jinping, right, kind of as the emerging topic of the day, I guess the standards for this course, right, this whole encouragement of free market policies are no longer in, not just in place from the Deng Xiaoping era, but Xi Jinping is now going into full economic imperialism, under the Belt and Road, and of course, if you're talking about Chinese values, Chinese values, yes, China is an ethnically diverse place, yet they do not have the kind of issues that we have in the United States, because there are some holdovers from the Mao years, right? One of the holdovers from the Mao years is re-education camps. So let's just take a moment and look at this.
China. Look closely and you'll see these huge complexes being built. From the sky, they sort of look like factories or even schools. But look even closer. This line is one facility's perimeter wall. And these shadows, they're cast by watchtowers along the wall. This compound isn't a school or a factory. It's an internment camp. Inside these camps, the Chinese government is detaining.
All right. So anyway, so we see the Chinese values that are being exported. Okay. So when you talk about, right, when you start talking about censorship, civil liberties and such, these are things in which it's a very, very slippery slope when you start talking about restricting any of these kinds of things, right? So anyway, this is a broader, more complex topic, right? But anyway, just because I did reference it, I felt the need to kind of throw that in there. All right, that is all for today. Sapriati.